Okay, I'd like to have your full attention for a little while. We're going to start moving into not what I will call a full-fledged professional program for adjusting. Because if you have a serious problem with your spine that requires a good chiropractic adjustment, or what we will call a naturopathic manipulation, or an osteopathic manipulation, the techniques vary a little bit, but the end results are pretty much the same. Then I want you to go to somebody who can do the job right. What you folks will be learning will be some very gentle techniques which are to be used after the calcifications have been removed by point holding from the spine and from the neck area and from the tailbone. And these are adjustments that anybody can utilize safely if they understand the iris of the eye and have worked on the point holding carefully from one end of the body to the other. This will help to give some relief, but yet again I want to point out that you need to have professional help in areas where there may be damage to the vertebrae, which will require professional help. Is this clear to everybody? Now with body electronics, when you can work with an individual who wants to go the route, then probably with 90% of the people, this is all you'll need to know. But if a person has had some very terrible injuries, you may have to require some professional help. Now, what we'd like to first of all do is to go into a little gentle massage work, where over the years I have looked at massage, I have been trained in various forms of massage, and after being trained in all this various massage work, which frankly has contradicted one another in their techniques, everything from going with the fibers and another technique going counter to the fibers at right angles, and kind of like a strumming with a banjo technique and so on. And all of these different techniques are out there. And they're all out there, and they all contradict each other. And so I started taking a good close look. What do we really need to do? What do we really need to do to be for the best interests of the people we're dealing with in body electronics? And how much do we need to do? So we're going to go into that very carefully, and we're going to start very gently using this today. And I want you to be very gentle in these techniques, because that's how they are. And I'm going to try to show you some of the maneuvers that we will use, and we'll start using those today. And if Anita can do it, anybody can. And if I have a problem, she'll take and put my vertebrae in just slick as a whistle. She's not a very big lady, and she doesn't put a whole lot of pressure on, but she's all that's necessary. With the right gentle maneuver, the vertebrae just snap right into alignment. Okay. First area we have to deal with is the understanding of the anatomy, which we've already gone into in part. And you'll have what they call the sacrospinalis muscle, which comes all the way from the skull all the way down to the back areas on each side of the spine, all the way down here to the pelvic area. And it's attached all the way down to the various vertebrae, various cartilage and so on, all the way down here. Now this sacrospinalis muscle, which will be at the deepest level, will be covered up again by the rhomboideus muscles here, and then those will be covered over by the trapezius muscles here, down here, and this will be and all of this area here will be your latissimus dorsi. So I have developed a little technique which I think that you will appreciate, and I'm going to try to demonstrate that now. Now, one of the problems we're going to have, which will keep it right here, Doug, if you would, please, which would keep the muscles from letting go of the vertebrae, is that these are always tight. So what I'm going to show you is a technique that I will use where I take the heels of my hands and I am on the far side of the spinous process of the vertebrae. And when I take my heels, I have a rocking motion. And I take these muscles that are very deep as well as surface, because you have your sacrospinalis muscle covered by your latissimus dorsi, covered by your trapezius, covered by your rhomboids and so on, way up in here. And what I'm doing is I'm taking all of those muscles, as some of them I'm going with the grain, on some of them what I'm doing is getting at cross angles to it and taking the deep sacrospinalis muscle and pulling that out away from the spine and relaxing those muscles. Not from the standpoint of tearing them away from the spine, but gently massaging them. And I find that when I do this particular maneuver, up and down the spine properly, then what I can do then is I deal with certain manipulations that you will learn, and this will put the spine in straight. Tom, have you had an adjustment lately? Only the neck. Okay. Now I have those on the right side of the body pretty well relaxed. So I go to the other side and I do exactly the same thing. And I get these particular muscles in. Notice how the rear end is in rhythm with my massage technique. Do you see this? As the rear end moves off to the right here, then my rocking motion here on these muscle structures go the same way. And I have found over the years that this relaxes the person considerably. And you just keep that going until these muscles right in here kind of give away. Now, if you take a look, very careful look, at the bone structures on the chiropractic technique on the material that I passed out to you, what I try to find is the vertebrae right in here which are out. And these are all out through here. And what I'm going to do is put them in a very simple way. Watch. I take my right hand, I'm on the left side of his body, right? Or left? Okay, I'm on the left side of his body. I take the heel of my right hand the same way as I would in the rocking motion in the massage work. Okay? And what I do is I push the muscles out away from the spine with one motion. I take my left hand as I'm kind of over the body, and I'm pushing the muscles away from the spine with my left hand on the left side of the back. And I have a line which is, pardon me? And I have a line right here about a 45-degree angle between my right and left hand on how they're faced. And so as I'm pushing out away from the spine with my right hand, and I'm pushing out away from the spine with the left hand, I do a very simple rotation of both hands going the same direction, and I push down, I rotate, and I push away all simultaneously, and the vertebrae that is out will go in without a thrust where I'm not tearing tissue. Now I want you to understand something. With all due respect to the chiropractic profession, they do a wonderful amount of good. But what they don't understand, if there's calcifications here, which are holding this in a block area, and I take and I break by a thrusting action, I break those calcifications, I create a mini hemorrhage in those areas of broken calcification, and that mini hemorrhaging then will have to regrow more calcification around that mini hemorrhaged area. And so the calcification becomes more intense, and then more intense, and then more intense rather than going away. Now, if a person is on a good nutritional program, what happens to the calcifications? They slowly go away. But in most cases, most people are not on a good nutritional program, so the calcifications become worse and worse, requiring greater chiropractic adjustments to keep the vertebrae in alignment, and the calcifications continue to grow. Now, once the calcifications are gone, by the way, Tom, do you feel the heat there right under the rib cage? That's your pancreas area. Right under the rib cage there on your right, do you feel that heat there? And right in the middle, right under the sternum there, feel that? Okay. That's where we're getting nerve supply and circulation into the area where the body electronics did not get the vertebrae in. It dissolved the calcifications, so now we can restore the nerve supply properly to that pancreas area. And by putting that vertebrae in properly, now he'll feel the heat in that pancreas area right under the rib cage. Any questions on this? Yes. I will go over that, and I'll go over that, and I'll go over that. I do 3 triple axis. I push down on one hand. I'm pushing out away with both hands, this direction, okay? I'm exaggerating the actual motion, but I'm pushing out as I'm pushing down as I'm rotating. And so I'm pushing this direction with both hands, which is a counterclockwise positioning, okay? And then if I come back the other way to get the other vertebrae right down in here, I'm going the opposite way, and it's in. I think we got that earlier, didn't we, Tom? Yeah. How many pops did you have in here? 2. Okay, I got the other one already. And so what happens then, that opens up that whole blood supply now. Now, it wasn't subluxated very badly, just enough to cut off the nerve supply into the pancreas area. And so just very gently, you go down the spine. Most of these will be in, no problem. The main problem will be the blood sugar, and that'll be the digestion. There's one little one right here. Feel that one, Tom? And just the rotational factor. You try that triple axis and you get those vertebrae, will just snap right in without any great fuss on the matter. Okay, now once those are in, up and down through the back area, then we will do this one, and this will scare you a little bit. You may not want to do it. That'll be your choice. But what I'll do, I'm on the left side of the body, and the upper thoracic vertebrae need to go in, which go to the heart-lung area, about the first to the fourth thoracic vertebrae. Doug, if you can stand behind me a little bit so people can see, and just stay out of the line of vision here. This is a very important adjustment. It's very simple. I put my right heel of my right hand on the muscles in the rhomboideus area to the left, which I've already loosened up. I take the head and I turn it off to the side where the head will rotate. As you're looking down on the head, it's going to be rotating in a... What direction is this? Okay. Now that's going to be in a rotational factor. And I'm going to push and thrust the head gently away from me, in the opposite direction from me, where I take everything to limit. I take this to limit, I take the head to limit, and I get this type of a rocking motion like this. Now watch carefully. Feel that go, Tom? And that's in. That's all there was to it. But I take it right to limit and go just a little bit past limit. The head rotates, the head structure moves this way, I push it in this way, and the vertebrae pop right into line. Now, over the years, using this technique, we have helped so many people with their neck problems. Several of the ladies here had, at the beginning of the course, quite a dowager's hump in here, and those dowager's humps are now gone. We'd adjust this area right in here after the calcifications are dissolved and the backbone is straight. Now, how many are in that boat? May I see a show of hands? We had several, quite a few. Okay, about 6 or 8 or 9 of you. And that has, this here now is now straight. Now, I'm going to get the other side also, and we're going to do this, and you're going to see this several times before you try it yourselves, because I don't want anybody with a crooked neck coming out of here. Now, the gentle nature of it, I'm not pressing very hard on this at all. I'm just rotating it. I'm taking it to limit and then rotating it, and the vertebrae just snaps in. So if you use the triple axis approach to that neck, then the vertebrae just move in naturally because the calcification has already been dissolved. You got that? So on the other side, I take there it goes. And the vertebrae pops in. And all of a sudden, if I did this right, which I think I did, Tom should have heat in his chest around the heart area. You got that, Tom?
Yes.
Yes, he says. Okay. Now that'll take care of these vertebrae here. Now, normally, I will save the neck until last. But now a little bit of a lumbar roll is very simple for people who do not have severe injuries to their pelvic area. After you have done the ischial tuberosity, remember where the ischial tuberosity is? Remember where those were? Okay, once these are done, which are very important points, once the pubic bones are done, and once you have taken care of the tailbone and all the lower lumbar area, then what you do, Tom, would you lean over facing me? Okay, just on the side. That's perfect. And what I'll do simply is have him, he's laying now on his right side facing me. I have him take his right leg and push it out straight, locking the knee. And then I have him take his left leg, pulling it up and just letting the knee rest over the edge of the massage table so I can get some good motion on it, and just locking the foot behind the hamstrings. Just let me have you. Okay, and I keep this as bent as I can. Some people have a sore knee, they can't bend it, so you do the best you can. And then what I do is I put my left hand right in front of the shoulder on the pecs. I take my right hand and I put that right on the left side of the hip in the sacral area. And then I simply rotate him back and forth this way. And if you notice, I'm taking him and pushing with my left hand this way, I'm pushing with my right hand this way, and I'm taking him to limit. And then I just simply, to relax him, I just simply go back and forth until I get a bit of momentum. And then I just simply push and pull a little further past the limit, and you felt the lower back go in.
Yes.
Yeah, did you hear it? Okay. And that'll take care of a lot of lower back pain. Pardon me? Repeat?
That'll take care of a lower back.
That'll take care of a lot of lower back pain. Now, so right in this area, again, I just take my left hand, and I see I'm just taking the body and just pushing it back and forth like this. He's a big body, okay, but there's very little force being used. I have him in a balanced position. And the whole thing is leverage and balance. And so I have him here in a very leveraged, balanced position. And I just take now my other hand, it's still very leveraged and balanced, and now I'm going to take my left hand and push away from me into a limit, as much as he can do naturally. And then I take my right hand and I push back this direction toward myself with my right hand right on his hip area. And then I just move back and forth like this. Now he's at limit until I feel just right about it, and then I go a little bit further with both hands, and nothing happened that time, so the lower back is in. Now, Tom, roll over the other side. Now, the lumbar roll is very common. Straighten this one out, sir. Okay, let your knee fall over the edge here a little bit. Okay, just very simply. Feel it move? That's it. Now just lay on your back and relax for a moment. I don't hurry an adjustment. I usually let a person lay for 5 or 6 minutes after an adjustment. Just lay there and relax and feel the energy flowing. Because after the calcification has been removed, and after the adjustment is made, the person should have a lot of heat going through different parts of the body where they were blocked off before by the subluxation. Okay, Graham? Laying like that. The point of it is get the arms out of the way and have them go back kind of behind his body a little bit, just where they're comfortable and flopping around. That's the way I see it. Now you also take a look. Yes, Rex?
When you were doing the thoracic move, when somebody's got a depressed spine, what happens in that case?
Say that again, sir.
When somebody's got a depressed spine, they're lying on their stomach, and you can see that it goes the opposite way.
You don't do that.
You don't do that.
No.
Good.
You wait and do body electronics and get the spine straight before you do this sort of thing. Okay. If you've got the arched area where it shows osteoporosis problem, or you just don't do that. You don't touch it. Now, the next thing you want to look at very carefully will be see whether or not you have a short leg. And Doug? And what I do is I just lift him, I put my hands behind the heels, I grab him roughly around the Achilles tendon, just basically, and then I just move the body back and forth, just relax him. And then I bring the heels together where I have the measurement of what we call the inner ankle bone or the inner malleolus. And in this case, his legs are pretty straight, so he hung his legs on straight. But sometimes you find one leg where the inner malleolus will be down about 1 inch to 1.5 inches, where there's a distortion in the pelvis. Going back, here's where you go back to the anterior cervicals, and you work on the anterior cervicals to bring the pelvic area into proper symmetry, and you'll watch the legs actually straighten out where, for example, if this is a longer leg, and I'm sure Doug went over this with you, everybody, and when Doug went over this, I'm sure he explained how the long leg here actually becomes a short leg. And this one leg will usually grow about 1 inch past the other one, and then this one comes on down, so both legs will eventually be perfectly symmetrical. But you have some very interesting annex as the legs move back and forth. Overshooting. Now you didn't cover that. You didn't cover that in body electronics. Okay, but this anterior cervicals you've got to have. We didn't cover that? Okay, they know where the points are.
We covered the points.
You covered the points. Good. But that's going to be used for any type of a pelvic distortion. That's going to be used for bringing that into a perfect symmetry. The anterior cervicals are wonderful for that. Now, you did cover, of course, that when you do the anterior cervicals, that the point that you want is the one that will bring the pain down through the arm and the shoulders. And when that pain comes down through the arm and shoulders, then you know that you've got the right point. That's going to affect the hips and the short leg problem. Any questions? Okay, we've covered that. Now, if you are unsure of that, then we'll take a group and cover that again. It's going to vary from one person to the next because of the anatomical differences. Not all nerve supply will be coming out of the same vertebrae going to a certain part. So you have to find out where the calcification is in the neck, press on that. If you get the numbness down the arm and the pain through the shoulder, you know you got the right spot. Okay? Now we'll cover that. You have to ask us, and then we'll cover that again for you. And we'll do that in the time that we'll be doing the point holding. Now, next situation, after he is relaxed pretty well, we do a very simple manipulation, and there's various ways you can do that. Some people like to manipulate, and they can do it very, very effectively laying down on the table. In my training in chiropractic college, I had a fellow whose hands were about twice the size of mine, and he took me sitting in a chair. And I'm going to take a chair now. Can I borrow your chair, sir? Okay. And have you over here, Tom, if you would, sir?
Get him up front there.
Right up here in front. Maybe move the table a bit out of the way. And just have a seat right here. And here's where we do the triple axis motion again on the neck. And I first of all find out where the problem is. And got a little bit right here, Tom. And a little tiny bit right here. I'll put this one in first. I take my right hand on his left, on the vertebrae, that's where there's a little bit of a, you can feel where the vertebrae is just slightly rotated. And I put my finger over that and I pull out this direction toward the camera. First direction is straight forward. And I pull that out with my hand when I do the adjustment. The heel of my hand rests upon the jawbone, and I rotate that in this direction, for example, on this side. And then my left hand is going to be pushing the head in this direction. So I have one force in this direction, one force in this direction, and then the jawbone situation will be a third force of the rotational factor. And as I just take the head and have him just gently feel the motion here. Did that move up there, sir?
Yes.
Did you hear that? A little tick. That's all you get. And that's in. A little larger one on this side, and we might have a little bit more noise on this side. And we do the same thing. We rotate the jawbone. At the same time, we put a little pressure on the head away from me, and I'm pulling out toward that direction at the same time. So we just move that. There it goes. Feel that move?
Yes.
Little tick there, and that's in. Now, automatically, if I get the right spots, which I should, you'll feel a heat flow back around behind the ears and sometimes into the head. And Tom, do you feel that? Or sometimes if the blood supply and the nerve supply is not shut off, you won't feel anything because he's already got that. But do you feel kind of a heat flow? Okay, you should feel a heat flow when you get those upper vertebrae in. And we went basically for the first and second vertebrae. Now, if you go to the Palmer School, they'll go for the first vertebrae, and they have a little special gimmick that you press on, and you got one doctor there, and he's just doing the same manipulation all day long.
Hole-in-one.
Yeah, the hole-in-one technique. And they feel if you get the first vertebrae in, then everything else follows. Sometimes I hit the first and second vertebrae, and then on Ken, you all heard his vertebrae. He had about eight snaps there, showing that thing had been out for a long time, and those vertebrae had to go in that way. Where's Ken? Ken's down the kitchen now. Okay, cooking up something very delicious for everybody. Okay, any questions now on this? Yes, Ian. On Ken, same thing as I did on him.
The one where you got the head on the chest.
Oh, the head on the chest business for the first cervical. I don't think we're going to have to worry about this. I'll show you how we do that. Can we turn the chair to the side, sir? Way around. Keep going. Okay. It's a very simple technique where I have him put his head, I'll go both directions here, put it right here on my pecs, right there, good. I put my fingers under the skull and I lock my fingers, and then I just simply move my body back and forth, and if that first cervical vertebrae is not locked in properly, then we'll get a grinding or a popping at the very top of the vertebral column. Okay, here we go. Anything there, sir? Nothing there. So the thing is, he's never had any real major injury to the neck area, like falling on his head out of 15 feet high. Nothing major. And so that vertebrae is in. Who's had a problem in that area?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
When you showed that yesterday, you said put the thumbs in front of the ears.
I didn't say that. You take your area here where you have your fingers locked behind the skull, and you're basically keeping the head firm, and you just move back and forth and keep that head rocking. But it's best to keep the thumbs in front of the ears, otherwise you abrase the ear a little bit.
But it's really not a part of the adjustment. It's not that important.
It's important not to hurt him while you're adjusting him, or else he stiffens up, and then you've got a problem. Yes, sir.
How often do you do it? Is once all right?
Once is done. Now, has anybody had a terrible neck injury of one type or another? I'm not going to touch you, sir, at this time. Ian, come up here. Thank you very much, Tom. I'm just simply locking my fingers under the base of the occiput.
The other question was, when you were doing the adjustment sitting up of the cervicals, you picked the adjustment you picked the cervical on the left and then the cervical on the right.
That's right.
Was that because of the left side before the right, or was that because the one at the top was because that was above the one below? Or
it didn't matter.
It didn't matter?
No. The muscle structures up here, under the skull here, which we'll be getting into later on today. Do you feel this right here? That's way out. This is way out. And you have a lot of injury here to the upper part of the neck. Now, just sit. But just come forward this way a little bit. I'm going to have him put his head now once again on my pecs. I lock my fingers behind the skull. Now, he's got a big head, so my fingers are not around the ear, and I just move back this way. And push your head up a little bit. There we go. Okay, here we go. Tell me when you feel a little pop at the top. There it is. Okay, hold still. Sometimes a person's had a lot of damage to that one spot. He'll see stars from that. Just a little simple one like that. Do you feel anything going on? Pardon? Not a great deal. It's numb in that area, he says. We got a lot of numbness here to worry about because of he's been suppressing pain for so long. Okay, and while he's up here, I'll go through the neck adjustment again. We're going to go very carefully up here. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to loosen this up. And a lot of calcification in the ligaments here, right up in here especially, and this is way out. So I first of all find the location, put my finger on it, and I'm pulling out this direction as I hold it. And then I rotate gently the entire head to where I come to limit. I take the head and bob it slightly to the left until I come to limit. And then usually what I would try to do is to distract his attention in some way, which I didn't do because I didn't have to. He was already relaxed. Did you hear that pop go in? Okay, now that should get some heat going right up in the head. Tingling. Feet are tingling. Okay, that's a good sign. Now let's get the other side. Turn the chair around this way, sir.
Question, John. If there was more than one on the one side, would you do more than one on the one side first? Or?
If they go, fine. Sometimes the whole lot of them will go. But I make sure the first and second cervicals are in.
Would you then do the fourth?
I don't normally do those because I know that if I get the first one in, the rest will follow. Now, do you feel this right here, sir? It's way out. Okay. Let the head fall gently to the right. Already went in. That's the motion. That's a triple axis. They just slip right in. One of them did go. Okay, there's another one. That's two. It's very simple procedure. You get all three together. Now, let's see what we have this time. Nothing yet. There's a big one. How many?
Well, about three then.
About three that time.
That's 5, 6,
5 on that side, 6 on that side, you say? Okay, now just keep the head straight and hold it right there. And sometimes after a person's had a lot of point holding, it's going to burn through there. Now some of you I've adjusted, and there's just burn for maybe 10 or 15 minutes after I adjusted that. And it just burns and burns and burns. So I have the person hold their head perfectly still and just go through the burning and breathe deep and hold it there until the burning is complete. Now, if I take somebody green off the street and I adjust them, which I won't do, then what will happen is they'll start burning. They think you've killed them for sure because they can't handle the pain. That's why many of your chiropractors today will not give an adjustment, but they'll give a little actuator, a little tap on it and do a little something to help to balance it, but they won't give that type of an adjustment that I have just given because of the ramifications of that. Now, for somebody in body electronics, they can handle that, and then, of course, you got the tingling in.
A little bit down the left side, yeah.
Tingling down the left side? You have heat in the head?
I don't know if it's heat, it's something.
Warm? Around behind the ears?
Yep.
If you notice the ears on this side are pink. And what color is the ear here? Oftentimes they get pink, after the adjustment, where the blood supply starts working up where we have been compromised. Means oftentimes we have a numb head. You told me that. Okay. Questions? Questions, yes.
Wolf kind of asked the question already about how often you can do this. It's just that I see some people doing it quite a lot of the time. Like if they've had a late night and they're feeling really tired, they're going to do a neck adjustment. Could that promote ligament laxity? And I can see that the spinal one would be quite safe to do often, but I just want to have a perspective on that.
I have adjusted a couple of people twice. Okay, I have adjusted Lewis there. Now we've got that, we're slowly dissolving the calcifications down through the fusion, and we're getting some good adjustments in there on Lewis. So I've been adjusting him about once every 2 to 3 days. And we're getting feeling now where we've never had it before. He's got feeling all the way down through the back area, and it's coming really well. And he had burning in his hips, and down the legs and down on the feet and what have you. So he has feeling down on your left arm there, Lewis. Raise it up there. If you take a look at the left arm, raise it up high. And we're getting feeling there, and his if you take his hand and feel it, it's no longer in that spasm where it's closed, and it's starting to loosen up a lot, and so that's starting to come right. But this is the adjustments with the point holding, and we have to learn how to do the proper adjustments. and be sure that we never hurt a person. Now, like normally, if there's been a spinal fusion, you do not adjust. All right? And so what I have to do is I have to go in very prayerfully and wait until I'm given the okay to go ahead and adjust them. And then I'm all right. And even then I'm scared spitless, because you're not supposed to adjust where you have your neck fusion. But you have to get that working eventually. Now, is there any questions that you have so far? Okay.
John, I'm a bit muddled because you said that Ian still has calcifications. You said something about him having calcifications in his neck, and I thought you'd said before that if you break up the calcifications that causes problems or something. They should all be gone, or have I misunderstood?
What I said is he still has some calcifications around the ligaments. Okay, but the vertebrae have been pretty well worked over. And so if you notice, when I worked on the one side, I just barely put him to limit, one vertebrae went in. I took him barely to limit again, another ligament went in, and I just gave him a very gentle adjustment, and 3 more vertebrae went in.
Yeah.
So on that one side I had about 5 vertebrae.
So the vertebrae were all right, and they're not calcified, and it was the ligaments then. And that it was only the ligaments, not the vertebrae were okay then. Not calcified at all.
The vertebrae were not calcified.
No.
I would not have adjusted him if they were calcified.
Okay.
He's had a lot of work on those.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Neil?
It's probably about the situation with the muscles being ready to adjust. For some people, they may have few calcifications, but the muscles may be really, really tight. How do you ascertain that?
Well, the muscles weren't tight because those were worked out too. See, once you get the nerve supply and circulation back in there, then the muscles start relaxing a little bit. And his muscles are really, if you feel those are pretty doggone good shape. No heavy spasms that would keep the neck from moving.
And also, I've had a number of adjustments on the neck, but just recently Andre did one, and the feeling and the sound, etc., was completely different. It was like sandstone, all of them, whereas normally with what I've heard here is a click. What would cause that feeling of like sandstone?
Andre, would you come forward, please? I want to have Andre talk about this because he's a very accomplished osteopath, and he's also now has the understanding of body electronics, and he's going to put the two together for you from his experience.
That sort of feeling of sandstone that you described, Neil, I think it's probably just some residual crystals or whatever around the joints. But the thing is, it was very smooth. Like, the best adjustment is where all the joints can move in unison with each other, which they do when we move our neck around and talk and twist it around and so on. That's how it should be. But unfortunately, most of us do have fixations, and especially around C1, C2 area. Another very common area is C5, 6, 7, because I suppose the way we slouch at desks and stuff like that, or watching television, and of course it also, because of that imbalance there, then it starts to affect you down in the lower back as well. Looking at it from the body electronics point of view, I'm very convinced that in a lot of cases, unless a person's had body electronics, it wouldn't matter how many manipulations they had, the corrections would be minimal, and they don't hold. One person here, Kai, is he here? Or, no, he's in the kitchen. Oh, Kai. Well, when I worked on Kai's back last year, I found it impossible to move anything in the lower lumbar area. But I noticed this year, since I managed to get a lot of burning down in the lower lumbar region, and I then corrected his L4, L5, it moved quite easily, and I'm very impressed with that, with the results using body electronics. Got anything to say, Kai? No? Okay. Yeah?
I would like to just talk a little about the emotions of an adjustment.
Andre, thank you very much.
Thank you, Andre. Because you may have a client that comes to you for an adjustment, and the maneuver is actually very simple, but sometimes you find that a person has a lot of emotional fear about it. I have been one of those people. And I've been actually terrorized. I have a husband that can adjust me every day, and I'm scared to death to get an adjustment. And yeah, and that's the way it is. But you may also find this with some of the clients that come to you, and don't be surprised if they start crying, or they, I've seen even people just pass out right onto the floor. Either right after the adjustment, or they get so emotional, they just start going into tears and everything. You just put your hand on them, and they start shaking and everything.
Don't touch me.
Yeah, and I've had to work through a lot of this. But if the person doesn't understand working through the word patterns and everything, you may have to guide them through that first, because you can feel their muscles tensing. And then to do the adjustment, it's really hard. Whereas if you can work through the word pattern a little bit to relax the person, it might help.
So, some people, when you adjust them, it's a good idea to trim their fingernails first, or wear long sleeves at least.
I'd like to ask a question about this area here in the upper back where the shoulders meet. That's a real difficult area to be manipulated. Is it just the one manipulation you used with the heel against the trapezius to get that area, or?
That's one that I use. Hang on to this. What I do is usually very simple. I have him take his right hand and put it on the left shoulder, and I have him take the left hand and put it on the right shoulder, and then I put my hands and arms around him like so, and then I just get a good grip on that area, and this full area in the back will go in first. No motion, and then the other motion I use is I will take my hands and put them on the back of the neck, and then take the hands and have him lock his hands on top of my hands behind the neck. And then what I do is what they do is called a cranial thrust, and I lift him straight up by the cranial, and to do that I just lean him back a little bit, relax a little bit. What'd you feel, sir?
My whole back moved.
And the whole back will move, especially from here on down, on that particular maneuver.
On both of those maneuvers, occasionally you're going to try to do this on somebody that's quite a bit taller than you. And another thing that I found sometimes helps is I'll go stand on the bottom step of stairs and have them in front of me. Sometimes to give you a little bit of extra height to be able to do it.
About 6 months ago, I weighed about 300 pounds at that time. I'm down to about 200 now. But at that time, I weighed about 300 pounds, and I loved being big because I could work with the big Maori men. I had the muscle and the strength because of my weightlifting work, and I could take and move those big guys around. I had no trouble whatsoever. I kind of wonder what's going to happen when I get back up there, weighing 200 pounds, and I have these 300 and 400 pound guys I have to move around. And then I realized, that it's going to be leverage and balance as you work on that. How'd that feel, Ian, right here now?
Felt like someone hung me. I mean, it feels good, but it went click right the way through, right down to almost the lower section.
Went right down the lower section, down the lumbar?
Yeah, not quite to the full lumbar.
Lower thoracic, and all this moved in. Okay. And that's a very good maneuver if you can do it, but you have to be strong enough to do that. And there's been times when I've lifted these big guys, and you're lifting them up, and then you're dropping them, and then you're lifting them before they hit the floor. Right, Ian? And the thing is, you start thinking about the acceleration factor of 400 pounds, and the 400 pounds is going down there. You got about 800 pounds to worry about, and then you have to pull it back up. And sometimes this body crumbles.
Then you need to get your back adjusted.
Yeah, then I have to get mine fixed. And that's when Anita comes in. No, she's put me together a few times, by working with these big people, but be very careful with that because you're not just lifting Ian's weight, you're lifting maybe double his weight because as it drops and then you bring it back up this way, you're increasing the amount of weight that you're actually dealing with.
Just on that subject, what it reminded me very much of is the bungee jumping. What effect would that have on your spine? Would it put it in or would it shake it out?
I looked at that the other day and I thought, well, I might try it, but I wasn't going to do it until Bob Wilson decided to.
I think you might have a long wait.
But that thing would probably stretch you out a little bit.
Would it do any harm?
I don't see how it can do any harm because there's not that much initial. It's a slow motion going down. I think the psychological harm and the fear would be more than the physical.
I might even try it now after that.
Any questions? Okay, now we're going to go over this stuff again and again and again and again until all of you are able to do it, and we'll start simply with the massage work and have Doug and myself there to go over it with you. Don't try to do this stuff alone until you get this stuff perfected, okay? Turn that on, sir.
I've got a few props here.
Speak into the mic.
I've got a few props here.
Speak into the mic.
I don't know that I know how to do that.
Hold it up about 2 inches in front of your mouth. There you go.
Okay. I want to speak this morning about
Hold it up, David, in front of your mouth because you don't record unless you're speaking into the mic.
About electropollution.
There we go.
Or electromagnetic fields. I guess I'm studying to be a house doctor, which includes a broader range, and my knowledge and experience about electromagnetic fields is far from complete. In fact, the information that's available is coming out thick and fast now. How many of us have used computers and felt drained by them? Wow, that's not a lot. How many have used computers and don't get drained by them? Well, that's not everybody. If you find you have resistance to me, just turn the clock back about 5 weeks when I was 15 pounds heavier and the smiles came a lot quicker. I'll take my glasses off. I can see what I've written here a lot easier, but I can't see your faces quite as well. So I have a little picture here that you can't see, but it shows a person sitting in front of a computer screen. And coming out of that computer is a whole lot of electromagnetic gunk. Thank you. I'll learn to perform for the camera yet. And coming from the screen are ELF and VLF radiation, extremely low frequency radiation and very low frequency radiation, infrared radiation, positive ions, ultraviolet radiation, X-rays, radio waves, microwave radiation and static. Now that's a whole lot of gunk that comes out of a computer. And we all know what synergy means. Now this is negative synergy. When you have all that stuff all coming at you at once, it's a whole lot worse than just adding it up one by one. So most of us feel very low after using a TV screen, after using a computer screen. The same actually happens with the TV, but we're not as close to it and we're not actually touching it. The same sort of thing happens in our house, and but it's more subtle. It happens from fuse boxes in the house, from fluorescent lights, rheostat switches, such as on the fans here. Transformers. I'd love to check out what happens in the middle of the room here. There's a lot of energy there. Crossing energy grids, ley lines, underground streams, underground cables and pipes. So what's available is a little meter like this. Wolf? Cordless telephones. Thanks, Wolf. What's available is a little test meter like this called a field strength meter. We run one wire in one side, and that's earth, typically on a green plant. The other side comes in, and I like to use it. I like to use this rather than the antenna, because when you hold this in conjunction with the meter, with the other side, earth, you become part of the circuit. So when I'm testing somebody's house, we start outside on the lawn, and we have a reading typically of about 0.05 volts or 50 millivolts. So this little gadget reads from 1 millivolt to 20 volts. So we start outside. If it's your house, you're holding this, you're experiencing what's happening. One house that I did recently, we started outside on about 50 millivolts, and as we walk into the house, we become surrounded by wiring, electrical wiring, and the reading goes up. And if it's a man-made carpet or plastic carpet, that also influences it. As we go upstairs, away from the ground, where we're less well-earthed, the readings go up. Often we'll find a hot spot, and hopefully that hot spot will be where people don't sit and rest or watch television. The hot spot can often be over 20 volts. This little machine doesn't go over 20 volts. There's another one called a trifield meter that measures up to 100 volts. But it doesn't give the same experiential effect as this little baby here. So we go into the bedroom, and I remember a house that I did where there was a water bed, and we'll get the person to lay on the bed, still holding the equipment, and the meter goes off the gauge. It's over 20 volts where this person sleeps. Now, it's commonly believed that we shouldn't sleep in an area where the voltage is above 1/10 of a volt. That's 0.1 volts. And this person, and most people sleeping in water beds or using electric blankets or having a lot of electrical equipment around them are over 20 volts. So the first thing we do is turn off the water bed, and the reading is reduced down to 2.5 volts. Amazing. Then we pull the plug out from the wall, and it's reduced down to about 1 volt. And then we look around and we find that there's a whole lot of electric cables, extension cords wound all around the place. We get those out of the road, and the reading drops again. And then there's a touch-sensitive light by the bed. We pull that plug out, and it drops down again. So finally we get down to a reading of around 1 millivolt, which is a long way below what that person was used to sleeping in. There are German doctors who believe that all cancer is caused by people living and sleeping in areas of abnormal radiation levels. Certainly, when we go to bed, we need to know that our body can relax. And certainly if we're above 20 volts, we're likely to have trouble.
How about electric clocks?
Electric clocks, anything electrical is going to give you problems. Clocks particularly the old-fashioned kind, can be really bad news. Yeah, you'll notice all sorts of differences. If you are barefooted when you're using the meter, you'll get a different result. But, pardon? Yes, please, Kyle.
Sorry, I just didn't want to let it go past. If you put rubber-soled shoes on while you're using that particular meter, you'll find that the reading often goes more than double.
Yeah. So it's a good idea to avoid rubber-soled shoes. You'll get an idea by going outside on the grass. If you're not getting a low reading there, it's often because you've got well-insulated shoes. So you take your shoes off and you get a more appropriate reading. The thing is experiential, so that you can't go far wrong. Another house I did was... Oh, we'll come back to that one. So if you have somebody in to test your house, and you find that it's pretty hard to get your bed down or your house down to a safe reading, then you start looking around for something else to use. And what I've found really useful is this little instrument or appliance called an electromagnetic power modulator. And if the current in your house or the magnetic fields can be likened to a piece of rusty barbed wire, then this takes the bumps and the sharp bits and the rust off the wire, and the whole house comes back to a healthy state from an electromagnetic point of view. You fit this in the house between the fridge and the power point. Now, they're very, very popular for people with computers. You fit it between the power point and the computer. Now, one of the wonderful things about this is that if you put it behind your fridge, it treats the whole house, not just the fridge. If you take it to the office and you plug it into your computer there, it benefits everything that is on that circuit, not just the one.
From a practical point of view, this also decreases substantially your power bill.
Yeah, that's true.
I have one in our home in the Cook Islands, and it cuts right down on your power bill. You can check it when you use it for a month, and it cuts it right down consistently.
Do they come in big enough units to put in line between your meter and your circuit into your house so you can cut the whole lot out?
You do that simply by plugging it in behind the fridge, and that treats the whole house. It even can have an effect on the people next door. The sorts of differences. Yeah, John.
Is that the same? Was it as an earlier model called the GT circuit set, which was like an extension cord with two green cylinders on it, and it was. I got one down in Melbourne. It was sold by the same people that were selling purple plates.
If it was sold by the same people, by Harmonic Products.
Yeah, so this is an improved model or a newer
by
one.
Noel and Liz Orchard. They manufacture these. That earlier model is set to be as effective as this, but they're gradually upgrading those.
Yeah. One of the principles I understand on this is that normally the electricity going through the wires operates in a random fashion, and the electrons go in all directions and just radiate out and spew out into your house, whereas when you have this, they operate in a uniform way, so they all travel nicely down there without going out, and that's how you get better utilisation of your electricity, and your bill goes down.
Now, this is important information now, so listen carefully to this. Continue on, sir.
How it works is not well explained by the producers of the appliance. I like to look on it as channeling universal life energy into the house. I've had this sort of technology fitted to my car as Anna and Alan and Julie. And it's very expensive, so it's $550 to have it fitted to your car, so you need to have more than a small amount of faith in this technology. It's called an ionizer. that's fitted to the car, but it's a similar technology to this. And as a result of doing that, my car muscle tests strong.
This is real, okay? I've seen this tested over and over again by people who have the equipment on their cars. And it not only saves in fuel consumption, which is demonstrable, it also saves from a person from having a lot of static buildup in the car system, okay? And therefore it kind of protects an individual from a lot of electromagnetic smog that's going on while you're driving the car, and it seems to have an energy field around it, which strengthens the body rather than weakening it, and that can be demonstrated by applied kinesiology. Now this is something here that Anita and I, we have a set of these, and we use them to control weather, because they will take and actually change the energy fields along the meridian lines when you orient them properly, and you can actually control weather with them. Now this we have seen. If a person has a toothache, you're able to use the same principle that has been developed here, and the toothache or pain in the body, in different parts of the body, disappears. Balancing technique, yes. But for a pain reliever, it works. For people who have sleeping problems, now, I haven't talked about this to several people who have insomnia. When this is in their room, this helps them to have very deep and thorough sleep at night, because it saves the entire room that you're in from a continual barrage of electromagnetic smog, which follows in with the wires of your house. I don't mean to steal your thunder, but this is really important that I want people to understand and know.
Thank you, John. That's very helpful to hear your experience. Am I on here? Yep. One of my friends had a new computer, and he was really knocking himself out, spending a lot of time on the computer. He was really zapped. And he took one of these modulators, and before he did, we tested his house, and his little girl was about 6 years old, and her bed was 15 volts. And we didn't know what to do about that. We'd made so many changes in the house. We said, look, let's call it a day, put the modulator in, and see what happens. And from that night onwards, instead of the little girl getting up 8 or 10 times, crying and really upset, and this would happen every night, she'd wake the whole household up. From that night onwards, she only got up once, had a pee, went back to bed without a sound. So the changes that happen in a household after using one of these are quite subtle. We can't measure them on a meter. The sort of things you look for are changes in the family, changes in the way the pets act. The fridge needs to be turned down as a rule. Food in the fridge keeps longer. Plants plants grow faster and more healthy. There has been work done with electrofeedback machines like the Listen machine and the Vega, etc., that show that when people use one of these with a computer, instead of their stress level going up, the stress level on average reduces by 28%. So you actually get to feel better using one of these with a computer on average. I have some of these available, just happens. And the way I like to operate with these is that I like you to pay me up front if you want one, but there's an unconditional 3-month guarantee. So if you think you're going to benefit, you can take one of these home, have it for 3 months, and if you don't like it, just send it back, and back comes your money. Because it is an experiential thing. That's all. They're $295.
And these people are legitimate, and I know them personally. They're good friends of ours, the people Liz and Noel Orchard, and they have some things that people disagree with because they don't understand the electronics involved. But the results that you will have on this is real.
Yeah, Niall's quite an extraordinary man. He spends most of his life working with energies. He has a triple pack, such as John has used for the weather, that's really great for helping people who live under power lines. And some of those people have dreadful headaches. They've had migraines since they moved near the power lines. And just using these triple packs, overnight, their migraines go and their whole lifestyle changes. He's fitted a lot of his equipment to buses and trucks and farm equipment and had tremendous results. And a lot of the equipment that he fits might be up to $1,000 just to put it on a truck or a farm machine. And he has people from all over Australia ringing him up and asking him to come and fit it, but he just can't be everywhere at once. So this is effective, but I think it's like many modalities, not everything works for everybody. And so you can't judge it on a one-off experience. It's either helpful for you or it's not. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. David, do you want to just give a price on that and let people who want that see you? How many would like to have a price? Okay, David?
It's $295.
It's how much?
$295.
$295? Okay.
And if you've bought one and you wish to become a distributor, well, there is a business arrangement that Noel and Liz have worked out. Thank you.
Okay, see David.
Pardon? Oh, for overseas people, this is for 240 volts. I guess 200 to 240 volts. For people who live in the States, there will be a modulator specially made for them available in the near future. Oh, this one? The trifield meter is available from the States. What's the magazine? No, I forget it at the moment. The trifield meter is $190, and the field strength meter is $195. I have one of these available here for that price. They're available from Inner Glow in Melbourne. The people who did the Holder Clark supplies. There's nothing else. That's part of the field meter.
Okay, thank you very much, David. I think Sama has a question for you, sir. Come up here, sir.
Are those products now in Europe, so that we can at least look for the information in Europe, or they're not?
It's an Australian product, and it will work wherever you have 200 to 240 volt systems.
England has that, so is the company not yet doing it in Europe? Because I think it will be easier for some of us to buy it later.
Noel and Liz live here in Australia. The meters you can get in Europe. But as far as this other device, you cannot get that in Europe, to my knowledge. Okay? You got a hand back there? Okay. Anna.
There's a recent issue of the Health and Healing. I've only got 2 copies up there. The rest have gone. And there's on the inside, there's a double page on what David was just saying on the products, on the modulators. Now, there's also a special offer in here that if anyone, with each modulator that people buy, they get 3 free annual subscriptions to the Health and Healing. There's also a magazine, the Exposure magazine, which talks about all electromagnetic fields. and different studies that they've done and how it affects people. That's included, and also Fields of Conflict, which is written on the same subject. So if anyone wants to have a look at this later.
Thank you, Anna. Rex?
Thank you. Those tri-field meters, I've got one of those, but I thoroughly recommend them as a practitioner because quite often you have something stubborn that you just don't seem to be able to do anything about. And I had a chap that he's an insurance salesman, and he was in his office all the time, and he insulated. He thought he'd got himself all set up. So I went up there with a meter because we suspected we'd worked for months trying to sort him out, and he still had these confounded headaches and everything. So we went up and checked his office out, and there was some thick cabling going up the outside wall, and it was right in line with his spine. And there was a huge reading. I can't remember the reading. And as soon as we organised him at a different place, it went. So as a practitioner, this sort of thing is really vital to have something like that, and they're not that dear to to have in your back drawer, and just bring them out when you've run out of ideas.
Any other questions here? Okay. David, do you want to anything more you want to say, sir? Julie?
Just to continue on from what David was saying, David and Liz are just involved in a study with Monash University because they just carried out an experiment with mobile phones, and they actually cooked a chicken in 8 days, and the mobile phone was just on standby. So imagine what that's doing to your head. Yep.
Thank you very much, Julie. The mobile phone. Julie, would you repeat that again, please? You got her on?
Slowly, okay. Monash University in Victoria, they had a thawed-out chicken. They had it in a controlled environment. They had a mobile phone on standby sitting next to it, and within 8 days, it cooked the chicken. The chicken was actually cooked. Yeah, throw your stoves away. So on the 8th day, the professor who was in charge of the experiment actually threw his mobile phone away. And now they're also expanding the experiment and looking at the little purple discs that they're putting on their mobile phones. Anna's cards also go on the mobile phones that reflect the electromagnetic energy away from the body, because they've found that people are having brain tumours, ear tumours, things from using the mobile phones. So they've just been expanding that. And on Four Corners, on the ABC here in Australia, they're actually going to be showing that.
I just want to add, we have at home in Germany, we also have a study from a Swiss university done last year, the beginning of last year, concerning mobile phones. And they have definitely found out that people who use these phones are prone to getting cancer just here in the brain. And whoever is interested in that, it's a whole study of about 20, 30 pages. They can, so it's in English, they can write to me and I can send it to you if you want to. It's a very interesting study, this.
Thank you, Wolf. Speak up.
Turn it on. Just on the telephones, they're working on 10 hertz, which is very close to the alpha level, and there's no resistance for the brain. It's going straight in. The other observation, I have one of the gadgets on the fridge, and I noticed that food was actually ripening in the fridge. And the other thing, cats for some reason like the hot spot in the house where dogs go for the low reading. So if you've got a cat and it's always going in one place in the house, well, we found out that's the highest reading in the house. I don't understand that, but...
They say in terms of like on a small scale in your home where there'll be like, I mean, naturally in the ground there'll be like the ley lines, and those are not good places for people to sleep or spend a lot of time. And it's the same thing with the cats with the ley lines. The cats will typically curl up in a place that will actually sort of shrink their aura, which would be a place that would be very bad for a person. So if your cat's favorite spot seems to be your bed, that probably is a good clue that your bed's not in a very good spot for you to be sleeping in.
Yes, we found out that if the person in the house says that the cat likes to sleep on the bed has usually got a high reading. And some of the readings are extremely high. And the higher you go in stories, 3 stories, 4-story homes, away from the Earth's neutralising effect, it seems to be a higher reading. And then you need to run an earth line down. And if you've got spring mattresses, that's a problem too. You need to have a copper earth wire actually onto the springs of the mattress to bring the readings down.
Regarding mobile phones, I see people, I know there are some people who, have to have them for business, but I see so many people carrying them around for pleasure everywhere. I mean, just sort of so that they can have a chat to their friends or something. I know we're looking for gadgets to make them safe, but I think the best thing is not to use them at all unless you have to. Let's keep life simple, shall we?
With the beds, I simply would like to add that many people still prefer metal beds, and then they are sleeping like in a Faraday cage, and the same thing we are doing here actually. So that's another thing.
Okay, thank you again, David. Okay, Doug, did you have something?
Well, I kind of missed most of the discussion, so I don't know
okay.
what we covered, so I'll sit it out.
Now, bottom line, are you aware of other research that has been done with laptop computers where the radiation from the computers actually cause cancer of the testicle area, the abdominal area, and so on?
It's actually not the laptop, it's the desktop.
Well, desktop and laptop, because you have the low frequency energies that interfere with the cellular activity in the body and cause those cells to become ill and proliferate as sick cells. And so any type, excuse me, Doug. Okay. I'm sorry for interrupting you. Now, the situation here with any type of a computer in your home, you'll have these tremendous energies that will put this material, even though they have their advantages, it seems like people who have death wishes are drawn to high electronic equipment, and that these actually accelerate the process of dying because of the terrible effect it has upon the body. Doug?
A laptop computer is a direct current appliance that has a transformer that plugs into the wall that converts the AC down to DC. So all you have to do with a laptop or notebook type computer is leave it plugged in when you're not using it so it's charged up, and then simply unplug it so you're just using it on the batteries when you're using it, and then there's not any alternating current electromagnetic field whatsoever, and you're getting as much radiation as you would from any 9-volt appliance like a flashlight or something.
Are you aware that direct current will have an energy field around it?
Sure, but it's not a frequency. It's not an alternating frequency like you would have with AC.
Every time you move your body through a direct current field, it's going to be affecting the cells of the body. And so you have the same effect upon the human body with a direct current, different as it may be, as you would with an alternating current. And the effect is going to be detrimental to the human body, nevertheless, because the energy field is going to be there. Now, that energy field, which we call a direct current, is going to be affected by other energy fields around it, giving all types of, I believe they call it attenuation, where a person will be affected. And even some of the experimentations they use a direct current as a carrier for the alternating current fields, which will still have a detrimental effect upon the person. And so any type of direct or alternating field is going to be detrimental to the human body. This we have to take into consideration. I hope you're all aware of that direct currents become carrier waves, literally, for alternating currents. And this has been proven over and over again with all the extensive work they've done on electronic research. And all of this will have detrimental effect upon living tissue. Any comments? Yes? Kyle.
Two things. With the direct current field, even if your body's not moving, there's a gradual acceleration and deceleration of the blood tied in with the pulse beat in the body. And this will set up cross currents through the ions in the circulating blood. The other thing was Robert Becker's research indicated that regardless of the type of radiation and regardless of the frequency of the radiation, there was a universal response to it above a certain level of, shall we say, field output, where the system was put into a stress response. And he wrote a very large section in The Body Electric, if you can get hold of it, which he called subliminal stress. And he mapped that out, and there was all sorts of different variations of effects at the cell level with different frequencies and strengths, but there's also a universal effect, which would be a subliminal stress response that he documented.
Thank you, sir. Duncan?
I was just wondering, what is the effect of this equipment we're using? The camera and this, what I'm holding.
We've already talked about that, haven't we? That's detrimental to our health. Now, do your homework on this. I don't have all the research here. I do have it at home. Do your homework on this. Get your books, study this so that you can be able to instruct your students in these areas. Because we have all been educated to the contrary. Doug?
I don't know if the book has been mentioned, but by the same author, Dr. Robert Becker, there's a very good book called Cross Currents that some of you might want to get a hold of that goes into a lot of this. It's called by Dr. Robert Becker, same guy that wrote Body Electric, Cross Currents. It's got a lot of good information. It came out about 5 years ago, so it's fairly up to date.
Dr. Becker trained an individual by the name of Arthur Bartholomew Flick. He's a medical doctor, and Dr. Flick has also been trained in body electronics, and he's still trying to correlate the two together by using energy from the outside in to control and monitor what we'll call consciousness change. Now, even though all of these energy fields from without will change what we'll call the morphogenetic field of the human body, altering the structure of the human body, this does not affect the consciousness change of the individual. And I want to make this very clear, that energies from the outside in will not change consciousness. Consciousness remains the same until we're able to move through the suppressed resistances of all levels of emotionality and all levels of the mental body, which are different types of resistances, until we can come to an understanding of the word patterns that have created the outer essence, shall we say, the outer manifestation of the inner essence. So this is important, okay? Now, I'd like to change unless there's any questions, I'd like to go on with something which is now exceedingly important. First of all, Peter.
There's something with children playing on their video games on video. It's actually the gunk coming off that they're becoming addicted to. It's not the games. It's all the radiation that they have to sit because it becomes a drug-like effect on them. And when the parents want to discipline and pull them away from the video games and from the computers that they're using, they're absolutely in trauma because they're not getting their daily dose of the radiation and the gunk. So it needs to be broken off slowly, or another treatment with diet and everything else to get them off. It's a real problem.
These are death crystals seeking to survive as death.
Absolutely.
And so we perpetuate the thing that keeps us in a sickened condition. And we keep doing the same thing over and over and over again, which makes us ill. And because this is a comfort zone. Illness is a comfort zone.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, do you have your notebooks out? I have people telling me they remember temporarily what was said, and then they forget it 5 minutes later after it was fully impressed upon their thinking, and then they can't remember the understanding that they gained from the lecture. So get this down on paper so that you can understand the psychological aspects of body electronics related to one of the major problems that all of us will be confronted with. Now, this is heavy-duty material. We talked about desire. We talked about desirelessness. And we talked about the incorporation of this particular duality into our consciousness, that we're able then to overcome those things that we have created which holds us in continual bondage. We've talked about this. Now I'm going to go into a two-pronged direction that goes clear back to the very beginning of time as far as we are concerned as a living entity, as a living being. Now, you all have your notebooks out. Okay, there are two pathways that we have been on from the beginning of time. And basically, it has to do with the element of control. Controlling the love or the attention of another human being. Controlling the communication or the acquisition of things which we have from the environment or from other living human beings. And we say living human beings because that is all that we can relate to at this point of time. Because at this point of time, there's only a handful of people that have had experiences where they can relate to other types of bodies and forms that we have all experienced from times past. Now, the first pathway is how we started from the beginning of time, where we desire control. That's the first pathway. Now that's control over love, control over attention, control over appreciation, control over other people's attention and activities and so on, where we want to have control over their communication, over their love. We want people to love us. We want people's communication. We want their attention and so on. Okay? The second pathway that we have embarked upon, about 50% of the people desire control. The other 50%, roughly, desire to be controlled. Desire to be controlled. And so we have on this pathway, it is just as important to understand this, because on the first level, the desire to be controlled is where the people have created the desire to be responsible, the desire to be cause. The second pathway of control, which you'll get full understanding of this in Book 3, when you start to penetrate some of the concepts that are there at a very deep level, you'll have to concentrate on it. The second is the desire to be controlled, which is really a victim level, where the person is here concentrating on being the effect rather than being the cause. They're concentrating and resisting the concept of being the effect of the environment or the environmental conditions rather than being in control of the environmental conditions. In other words, you have your cause and effect. Some people are resisting cause and some people are resisting effect. And this attitude that we have in our consciousness determines the very direction that we move throughout eternity. And so some of us have to be in control and others of us have to be controlled, where some people are victim makers and other people are victims. And this is where we have the cause and effect relationships going on between people. And when we get down to the bottom of it, we start having the codependency relationships between people. And when people's consciousness changes, then these codependency relationships are knocked completely out of kilter, and then water readjusts to its own level. Okay? Now, from desire, which we discussed, if we desire control, then we begin to manifest, if we don't get what we want, which we talked about. In other words, if we desire something, that means we don't have it. And by the very acknowledgement that we don't have something, we create the external conditions which the environment or the universe around us will move with measured precision to make sure that we don't have that which we do not, or that which we do understand that we don't have. And therefore we desire it. Now this we discussed. And so therefore, the more that we desire something, the more we create resistance to not having something, which creates the conditions in our not having it. Therefore, we want it even more until we reach a compulsion of having to have it. And we call this then the enforcement of the desire. And we get into the concept, I must control. And this is a compulsion where a person has to be in control. Control of other people's love, control of their wealth, control of communication, control of different things, and they have to have everything under their thumb, so to speak. Now, if that does not happen, and the people cannot maintain control because other individual intelligences are expressing their particular individuality, then what happens is we reach a point where I can't control. I can't control other people's love. I can't control other people's communication. I can't control the acquisition of what I want. And the person reaches a point of apathy and goes down into unconsciousness regarding this sort of thing. And then everything becomes absolutely a reactive state where the person from the position of control, listen to my words. As you get into the understanding of these words, you'll understand it at a far deeper level when you go into it hologrammically. We become totally compulsive and reactive concerning control. And it becomes out of control situation where the universe then creates the resistances that we have covered up by more resistances, to where we're totally into a reactive, compulsive mood of desiring, enforcing, inhibiting control. And this is one pathway which will lead to the disintegration of the soul, because it is a continued resistance which we perpetuate, which will bring about complete identification with matter on this pathway, which will literally lead to the disintegration not of the body, but the actual disintegration of the soul. And we go into a state of what they call the second death. The first death is the death of the physical body that we identify with. The second death that we enter into is the death of the soul, which will take place over many, many millions of years as a person continues this pathway until they can reverse it. Okay, and the reversal will be the knowledge which you're obtaining from these classes. And then we can reverse this downward spiral into identification with matter by reversing it with the concepts of unconditional love and unconditional forgiveness on each little karmic event as it unravels itself, as the universe represents it for our inspection and our experience. Okay? I think we understand that. The second pathway toward the disintegration of the soul is starting from the initial space of time, where we follow a pathway where we desire to be controlled. We want to be taken care of. We want somebody to watch over us and nurture us and love us. We want people's love. We want to have that nurturing aspect of life, and we're hurt inside if we can't find that sugar daddy or that ever-caring mother. Now, this nurturing aspect of wanting to be controlled, the desire to be controlled, is where I jokingly say, possibly I'm on this pathway. You know, we take a look at where we are. Sometimes there's mixed pathways. But I never get lost. People tell me where to go. And that's a very comfortable aspect. That's a very comfortable aspect, because as long as Big Brother is there watching over, telling us what to do, and the state is in control and taking care of us, and as long as they give us a job and a place to stay and food to eat and so on, and the state takes care of us, you know, and then you have the bureaucrats who are very willing to be controlled and tell people where to go, how much to produce, where to live, where their home is going to be, how much to eat, and they parcel it out like little misers, you know. The bureaucrats will be on one end of wanting to control, and then you have other people who are perfectly willing to be controlled because they are secure in that particular aspect of having their whole life controlled for them. Now, let's see where we fit somewhere between these two extremes. And sometimes we don't have a black and white situation, but we'll have shades of gray in between. And maybe certain areas we do desire to be controlled, while other areas we exert our fierce independence, and these things will be areas that we'll have to consider carefully. But in the desire to be controlled, if we're not being controlled sufficiently, then we start to do what is necessary to get people's attention around us where we must be controlled. And here's where little children sometimes that are on this pathway are very, very happy when they're being disciplined and they're doing what they can to attract people's attention, so they will be controlled. And then they're content because they're being controlled, because control is equated oftentimes, somebody loves me because they're controlling me. And here's where we get into the equations of A equals A, where love equals control. And they feel if they're not being controlled, not being given the attention to and told what to do, then there's no love. Are you with me on this? Now, every single human being will have elements of both the control or the elements of being controlled. They'll have the elements of cause, they'll have the elements of being the effect. So we go from the element of must being controlled, which is enforced being controlled, where we'll do what's necessary to force others to exert their control upon us, where we have to be controlled. And then eventually we reach a point, if we fail in this endeavor, we then reach a point where I can't be controlled. And here's where people are so far out of control that they can't be controlled either by their own self or by other people. And here's where people become totally reactive. Now, when we analyze this in depth, carefully, and go deep into the psychology of the human mind, we find that we are basically on one pathway, on one pathway or another pathway. And each pathway, depending upon our continued resistance, will lead us down the pathway to the disintegration of the soul, which is the rejection within ourselves of our own God energy, the recognition of our own I am concepts that we have discussed, and by denying this particular aspect of our lives, we continue to look for solutions for control and for solutions to be controlled outside of ourselves, and we look for that solution there with our continued resistance to those factors until we literally become totally conditioned by the environmental circumstances around us, and at that time we become totally identified with matter, where we have no memory as to how we set up our own game plan. Now this becomes quite difficult, and it becomes quite difficult to resist these patterns. It becomes quite difficult to go through the concepts which cause us to be in this out-of-control situation in either aspect, okay? Because our memory is occluded by the resistance, the emotional resistance of pain that we have incurred by inflicting it on other people, which then boomerangs back on ourselves, or having it inflicted upon us, which then boomerangs back on ourselves. So all of these things here fit in together at a very, very deep level. Any questions here?
I have a question.
Doug.
Okay. I hear you relating this scale to the pathway of the dissolution of the soul or the second death. And so...
Both pathways.
Both pathways relating to that. So I'm looking at this, and I don't know if this is a good time to go into this or not, but I'm looking at this in terms of chapter 29 there, and I'm wondering how this relates to the pathway of not giving up as opposed to the pathway of giving up.
I didn't want to bring that up now.
Okay, well, I didn't bring it up then.
So you bring it up. Stand up, Doug.
Well, I mean, I'd probably need to put a diagram on the board and all that sort of thing.
Nope.
Okay, well...
The diagram's in book 3.
Okay, it'd be diagram 29-1. Bob's been playing with this one. I don't know the page number. Is it? 638. 838. Well, it doesn't matter. It's chapter 29, 29-1.
Which book?
Book 3.
Oh.
Okay. Okay, there's a situation that goes like this. If you look at the scale of emotions from enthusiasm down to unconsciousness, and you look at the amount of resistance that an individual will have, you typically are going to have, as a person falls from enthusiasm down to fear, and this is either resistance to yin or resistance to yang. You'll get the same thing either way. You're going to have a pathway of increasing resistance from enthusiasm down to fear. And this will involve, and this is again going in that direction from enthusiasm down to fear, this is going to involve an endothermic reaction, and it's going to involve an increase in complexity in the crystal formations within the body. So this is moving in an involutionary direction from enthusiasm to fear. Whether it's resistance to yin or yang, what you're going to have is an increase in resistance. You're going to have an endothermic reaction, which is exactly why when you're going back upscale, you get the exothermic reactions from fear up to enthusiasm, because it's a healing crisis. But on the way down, from enthusiasm to fear, you've got an increase in resistance, you've got endothermic reactions, and you've got basically a situation where the crystal formations in the body are getting more complex. More complex. At the point of fear, as we're moving down scale, there are two options that take place here. One is that, and this is what John's been referring to here, is a situation where basically the person hits a point of giving up or giving in to the resistance. And this is what John refers to as the pathway of the second death or the dissolution of the soul. And so this is where from fear down to unconsciousness, you'd actually have a disappearance of the crystalline formations, or shall we say a reduction of the crystalline formations, where they would get progressively less complex from fear down to unconsciousness. And you would actually have a situation where you would be having your exothermic reactions.
That is correct.
From fear down to unconsciousness. And when you get down to the point of total unconsciousness on this pathway, basically you have what John would refer to as the death of the soul, or the second death there, because the individual has ceased to, basically they've given up.
He's given up and he's given in.
Yeah, they've given up.
And he is totally the effect of the surrounding environment at that point of time.
So that's one possible pathway from fear down to unconsciousness.
They have denied their own godhood completely.
And this sounds what John. This is something that John was describing here a little bit this morning when he's talking about the second death. He's talking about the dissolution of the soul, and that's one of your alternatives from fear down to unconsciousness. Is if you basically just give up, you're going to go exothermic on that pathway down, and the crystal formations in the body are actually going to get increasingly less complex, and you eventually get to the point where the second death takes place, and you're more or less recycled at that point. You get to a point where you're basically even the ego itself is disintegrated, and there's nothing left. The spiritual essence still exists, but the identity is lost.
The ego is not disintegrated. The ego, or the intelligence, as is the ego being synonymous with intelligence, that exists forever.
It'd be the personality.
But the energy field around that particular ego structure will be totally taken into a state of degeneration, where it breaks down, where there is absolutely no outer personality to that ego. That ego is stripped of all outer appearance as we would recognize it as a separate and distinct, unique personality. The personality is gone.
At that point, my understanding is that ego would more or less start over with a clean slate in a new reality. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, I have a question there then. If they master things in that reality, do they then have the opportunity to come back and resume that personality that's been scrapped and go through that, or is
not the same personality?
That's
no
lost
way.
forever.
That's gone forever. They come back with the beginning of a new slate of activity within a framework of a controlled framework, beginning with the mineral world itself and moving gradually upscale, as has been defined in other teachings, from the mineral world on back up. But at this time, they are no longer one with us, and this is terribly disadvantageous to those people that are tied into that individual on a very high level of association. But they are destroyed, both body and soul, as we would describe it. Not the ego, not the intelligence, but the soul is the combination with the personality of the person. The personality is gone, and they have to start over from scratch.
As they move in an involutionary direction and disappear at zero resistance at unconsciousness, do they reappear at an infinite resistance in another reality?
They are reorganized at that time. They are reorganized within parameters of total restriction and control.
And then they settle out in the new reality.
And they settle out then in their new reality.
Okay, so we have that one alternative from fear to unconsciousness, where you give up and you give in, and you basically go down to the second death. But there's another alternative which I wanted to mention here.
You might say, Doug, it'll take people millions of years to reach this point of total disintegration. But by giving up and giving in, you're adding to that pathway.
You're moving in that direction whenever you give up.
That's correct. Continue on, sir.
Okay.
You continue on, Doug.
Okay. So there's another alternative here, which is this. You've moved in a endothermic reaction from enthusiasm down to fear. And
now stop. Get this. Picture it in your mind and get it.
Okay. In either case, you've moved in an endothermic reaction from enthusiasm down to fear, and you've moved towards a state of greater complexity in the crystalline formation and the crystal formations within the body. The one alternative that we've gone into here so far is the second death, which is where from fear down to enthusiasm, what would you have, endo or exothermic? You'd have exothermic, which means that the crystals are basically gradually disappearing. There is another alternative, which is where you don't give up and you don't give in, and it's what John would term one-pointed resistance. You don't stop resisting. You're still resisting because you're moving from, you're still continuing to move down towards unconsciousness, but rather than giving up or giving in, you really fixate on what you're resisting, and you just absolutely refuse to give up no matter what. You absolutely refuse to give in no matter what. And what happens here then is that as you move from fear to unconsciousness, you actually continue in a endothermic reaction, and the crystals actually continue to get more and more complex. And this is actually, if you get all the way up towards unconsciousness, you approach infinite resistance on this pathway, which is where you get the formation of a lot of your short-lived radioactive elements. This is a you'll have to really get the diagram and read the book to really understand this, but there's a number of different types of time-space continuum warps that can take place, and this is the type that we're re-experiencing in a healing crisis in the visualization and consciousness courses. This is the one that a few people have gone through. But basically what happens is the body goes through a state of infinite resistance as a result of the total refusal to give up, the total refusal or the one-pointed resistance. And you actually go through a point of infinite... Well, you got to read the book there, Brooke. You go through a point of infinite resistance at the level of unconsciousness, as opposed to going down to zero resistance, which was the pathway of the second death. So what you're getting is a continual endothermic reaction all the way from enthusiasm to unconsciousness on this second pathway.
Let me just throw this out. You ready? Okay. At the fulcrum point, we then have the full development of the carbon atom. Okay, this is the fulcrum point.
At fear?
At fear. This is the full development at fear. Now, as you move above fear, from whichever direction or from whatever pathway that you have been working on, then the carbon atom itself becomes less resistance. The resistance is lost. The carbon atom sheds the melanin protein complex, which is the carbon hydrogen manifestation of the crystals. The crystals in the human body, which are carbon based, become less consistent in their hold on the human frame, and these carbon hydrogen protein hydrocarbons, if I can call that, which hold the person as a organic computer chip full of stored memory, these literally begin to break down into lesser and lesser elements. Okay? The vibration of the human body begins to increase at this point, where the carbon elements begin to break down into the lesser elements. And the body becomes more mobilized, like we're going from a solid, fixated crystalline formation into more of a liquid and then eventually a gaseous type situation, where we move from, if we look at the physical reality, we move from a solid like a piece of ice into water, which is liquid, into a gaseous state, which is amorphous, so to speak. It's just not, it's not contained. It just, it's there in the physical reality. The same thing is true in a spiritual reality when we take a look at that, because we're no longer bound into a solid state which controls our conditioned response reactive mechanisms. Now, there's two pathways, as I mentioned before. Just divide the periodic chart in half and you'll understand. One pathway, which is having to do with the one-pointed resistance pertaining to control, which is one of the major issues, which is associated with love, which is associated with communication, etc., etc., etc. Okay? This particular aspect of control, when we move through one-pointed resistance to the experience of wanting control and the other pathway of wanting to be controlled, will cause the creation of certain more complex elements, depending upon which in chemistry we have a valence concept. One will be on the left side of the periodic chart and others will be on the right side of the periodic chart. And the pathway of consciousness will determine which elements will begin to come into manifestation by the one-pointed continual resistance, which you will not get where you give in and give up. This is where you continue to resist until you move clear up through the top of the periodic chart with all the short half-life radioactive elements, and you go pooping right through that from infinite resistance into a zero resistance, which will be a part of the time-space continuum warp. Now, to be very frank with you, when you come back from zero resistance, which you'll manifest on a meter, which will control, which will be in your body, and you'll measure the resistance in your body as your mind controls what's happening on the body. At zero resistance, the body becomes a superconductor. At that point of time, you go from zero resistance for a period of time, and then you reappear at an infinite resistance, and you come back down through all of these things with all kinds of phenomena happening to your physical body and the surrounding environment for a period of time until you settle out in a new reality. And this is coming back from the downward spiral. We're coming back then into where we have overcome that particular problem. But that will only refer to those people who have never given in and never given up. And those are the only ones that will come back through that. And those are the people who are highly, highly competitive, where they refuse to give in to something that they believe in wholeheartedly, and their resistance mounts and mounts and mounts until they go through that particular time-space continuum warp, which will be rather disastrous to them as far as the body's concerned at that time. We're not going to get into that here. But when you come back the other way, you'll re-experience that whole thing, and you'll have memory coming back of having one time been terribly competitive and terribly resistant to the things of life. And that will be for those people who are on that pathway. Now, for the people who've gone the other route of resistance and giving up and giving in, which is the victim role, these people, when they go down and out, we cannot retrieve them because, how can we contact the spirit at the very level of their immortality, which now exists locked within the parameters of control of, shall we say, a piece of rock? And that's where they are. They're back down in the mineral kingdom, learning to be responsible for that which at one time they would not be responsible for, because they're always giving up and giving in and not overcoming and learning to overcome resistance by love or by other means at that time. So I just want to expose this concept to you, because the elements of the universe reflect the consciousness of man. Mother Earth is made up of the dust of this earth. Our bodies are made up from the dust of the earth, and as our consciousness changes, the very physical elements of our body go through tremendous transformation, and Mother Earth again reflects that. So it's not that Mother Earth is separate from ourselves. It's not that our bodies are separate from ourselves. We are all one. And when we understand this concept, we will understand that every single thought that we think will have an eternal reflection or outer manifestation of the inner consciousness, which is us, which we are as a God in embryo. I think I said enough, Doug. You go ahead.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. Would there then be, if you looked at the periodic table of elements and you looked at the diagram in terms of yin and yang, would there be a further division within the periodic table of those elements that were created as we resisted on the yin side versus the yang side?
Of course.
Okay. Then the other question I have is if a person were to go through the time-space continuum warp, well, really in either direction, but passing through a state of infinite resistance at one point, would this, if there was a Geiger counter handy, would this go wild there for a period of time?
I haven't ever done that.
But
because at the time that people have gone through the time-space continuum warp, we didn't have a Geiger counter on hand. We didn't expect it. It's when we don't expect these things, it's when they happen.
But theoretically, you'd probably get something even on a Geiger counter for a short period of time.
We've had very nice radioactive burns on clothing, on rubber gloves. We've had radioactive burns on tables, and we've certainly burned them through a few well-varnished walnut tables. I don't know the answer to your question, sir.
Okay.
We haven't put that to scientific test.
Should we get Wolf's question?
Wolf, are you ready for your question, sir? That's a different way of looking at it, isn't it? Are you ready for your question?
Yes. Well, I've got it written down. I mean, we have a free will to decide, for example, here on which path we are going, or partly in between. But now what happens if this free will is destroyed, for example, if someone has an accident and then is a mental a case as such? I mean, which way will this person, this ego, this individual then go?
We're looking at short-term, only this life, when there's been thousands and thousands of lifetimes. And if we get checkmated, so to speak, on a chessboard this lifetime, then we dump this body and we go get another one and we start over. And that's part of the game of life. I beg your pardon? Louis, are you stretching or do you want to talk? You bring your chair up here. Well, don't run over anybody in the process. Matthew.
My question is on the second branch of the downward spiral that's characterized by never giving up. Does that drop out into the mineral kingdom also? I mean, what's the end result of that?
We haven't got there yet. I've still got to cover that.
Okay, but basically, any resistance that we have where we give up and give in puts us into starting over at the very bottom of the ladder.
Again, in the branch that is characterized by resistance, is that essentially the victimizer personality?
Yes, sir. But they don't have to be the victimizer. They're just simply not giving up and they're not giving in, which other people will naturally be victimized by that because they give up and they give in. Sama.
I'm wondering how, when a soul becomes disintegrated, you said the people who are linked to that soul at a very higher level, it's a great disadvantage to them, or disfavor or something. How are they really? I thought that once a soul is disintegrated, it's gone, and all its karma, everything is cancelled out. Then the people who were linked to that lineage, whether genetically or anything, they will no longer have any. They can carry on their own without having any direct resonance with that soul which is disintegrated, is it?
Have you read book 3? Read it. That's a question that'll take a long time to answer. I don't mean to be harsh on you on that. It's just that read it, study it, and then you'll come up with some questions that will really be deep and profound. Yes, sir.
You were talking earlier about infinite resistance at unconsciousness.
Would there also, so that there is, am I correct in understanding that there's an infinite resistance at unconsciousness as well as the top end of the scale?
Yes, sir.
Is it the same resistance?
One is a one-pointed resistance, which will be explained in Book 3, and the other is where you give up and give in, which is just, you just become the total effect of it.
He's talking about the other pos, the one you don't get into about the infinite of enthusiasm.
I haven't got into that.
Will you do that, or is
no? Doesn't apply to us here. Okay? That's why I left that blank. I've only put in Book 3 that which can apply to where we are at this point of time in existence. The other things that don't apply to us, I left out.
Could you define what you mean by soul?
The soul is the combination of the ego, which is immortal in its nature, and the body and the morphogenetic field which make up the body. Now, when the body disintegrates, you still have the morphogenetic field there to a degree, which is impinged upon the spirit level, because that's the experience level of the being. When that's totally dissolved, that, let's say the personality of the person, which is an energy field, then all that's left is the ego. So the soul would be considered the body and the spirit combined of man.
So basically, on the pathway from fear down to unconsciousness, you have this possibility of one-pointed resistance where you don't give up and you don't give in. And what happens if you continue on that pathway long enough, as you move towards unconsciousness, in other words, as you keep refusing to give up and refusing to give in, and the resistance just keeps mounting and increasing, you eventually get to a point of infinite resistance. And this is passing, and what happens at this point is you pass through a state of infinite resistance. This is in a involutionary direction. You pass through a state of infinite resistance, and then you actually reappear in a different reality where you basically get to start out at zero resistance again, and then you more or less kind of normalize or stabilize at an appropriate level of resistance within those new parameters.
But you have those parameters which will be part of that invisible prison with invisible bars from which we cannot escape, because that resistance will definitely be there until we overcome it. And when we overcome it, we are then freed from those parameters of that jail that we have imposed upon ourselves in prior existences.
As I understand it, what happens is what happens is it's more or less a step of mercy, because you couldn't continue to exist at that point of infinite resistance. You would destroy yourself. So what's
and everybody around you.
So what's basically happening is you're getting sort of shunted off to a more restricted reality with more restricted parameters in that reality, where you have the opportunity to deal with things in a more constructive fashion, and that which you've resisted in the past with that one-pointed resistance is temporarily held in a state of abeyance. In other words, you don't really have to deal with it yet. You master this new reality, and if you're able to do that sufficiently, this is where you eventually can get the opportunity to return to the other reality. And
in the same body, in the same space.
And this would be passing through the time-space continuum warp, going back to the reality that you've left behind. This is the type of time-space continuum warp that John's been referring to in the books, and that a number of people have passed through. It's a healing crisis. I mean, if you're passing through a time-space continuum warp in this, what would now be an evolutionary direction, it's important to understand that that's an indication that at one time or another in your existence, you've passed through need a fly swatter here. You've passed through a time-space continuum warp in an involutionary direction.
I wish to say this much on that. Go get it, Doug.
Got a little one-pointed resistance here. There we go. Oh.
You let him go.
Yeah.
You've lost your spirit of competitiveness.
I've relocated him to somebody else's reality. So, Rex?
I'm just working on trying to get a picture of this, and so we're talking about an expanded awareness, like an expanded concept, and so on this one-pointedness is you have to let go. If you keep resisting, you have to let go of that option, and you revert to another option.
You reach a point through your resistance where it becomes so compulsive you can't let go.
Okay.
That's where Doug has said that it is an act of grace. Now, you haven't given up the ship yet because you still acknowledge that, there's still some life left in you. You haven't sputtered out with a wimp and a tear. You're still right there resisting right to the very end. And so you still got some God energy left in you, which is going to be recycled now.
Okay. Yep, that's good.
Go ahead. You haven't denied the God within you yet.
Okay.
When you're fully resistant.
Okay.
On one hand you have, but on the other hand you haven't, because there's still life in the old bird.
Okay. And so to resurrect that again, I'll have to go away and think about it. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Keith.
But I was just thinking, you've actually got to not give up. You've got to actually not give up to the challenges that come to you in life. But on the other hand, you've actually got to give up to the God part of you at the same time. So
but in the meantime, you don't give up and you don't give in. At the same time, you yield totally to obedience to law and principle.
Yeah, that's what I mean, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
You do both at the same time.
So you get a balance between.
Now, a lot of people who are quite yin, they give up to God, and then their own fight, their own drive is gone.
Yeah, they just say, "I sit in a corner and
they sit in a corner with a tear in their eye and a whimper, and they die.
They wait for something to happen.
Okay, yeah. That's what I don't want you to do. I want you to never give up and never give in, no matter how bad conditions are.
Oh, that's clear. Yeah, that's fair.
So basically on this pathway, on the way down, what's happened is you've passed through a state of infinite resistance, and then through basically a step of grace, you've been allowed to reappear at zero resistance prior to stabilizing within a new reality. If you reverse the process and go back in the evolutionary direction, what will happen is this: you'll be working through all of your different dualities, all of your different resistances, and you'll find that there will be dualities based upon dualities based upon dualities, much as you would have in a geometric proof. How many people took geometry at some point in the past? You know how when you make a geometric proof, you're building upon prior conclusions and prior things that you've proved? But if you trace it back far enough, there's certain things that are just accepted without proof within geometry, because you have to accept certain things without proof so you have something to build upon. What you have in your own mind really is a situation that goes much like this. There are some fundamental laws of the universe that apply to all of us, and what has happened to many of us at some point or another is we've fallen into a state of compulsive obedience to a particular law, where we have reactively identified with a certain law, and that which is John would say would be a compulsion. So in our own mind, we're always going to behave in a certain manner in accordance with this one law, and what you will then have built up from that pattern, and that resistance is what John would call truth versus resisted truth.
Which is a mental resistance, not necessarily an emotional resistance. You must separate the two resistances one from the other.
And this type of pattern will have an incredibly strong hold on the individual, because what you basically have is a compulsive virtue. By identifying with the law of the universe on a compulsive level, you are always going to be behaving in accordance with that law. So from your own perspective, as well as basically from other people's perspective, this is not going to be seen as a weakness. This is not going to be seen as a flaw. This is not going to be seen as a problem. It's going to be seen as a virtue, which is what makes it so terribly difficult for an individual to unravel this, because there doesn't appear to be a lot of feedback from the universe that there's even anything to change there. This is something you like about yourself. This is something that other people like about you.
The difficult part to see about this is this virtue that you consider is only your truth. Okay, somebody else might have a different truth, which they consider to be a virtue, and be in the same situation, which may be diametrically opposed to the truth that you have accepted and resisted. And so this truth will vary from one person to the next, because it is what has created universal laws is universal agreement upon those laws. And that universal agreement in one part of the universe may be different than universal agreement in another part of the universe. And so when you have people from different parts of this portion of the universe in these carbon-hydrogen bodies together, one person may have what we would call a time-space continuum warp concept, which would diametrically oppose the next person's, because the truth for them will vary. And that's one of the problems we take a look at. Some people say, well, my truth is different than your truth, and that's true. And we get back into the time-space continuum warp, and you can see the compulsive aspect, how one person is compulsively acting on their resisted truth, while Doug, for example, will be dealing from his resisted truth. And the two are diametrically opposed to each other.
Rex?
Come up here, sir.
Okay, so does that friction that's caused through those two diametrically opposed points create another problem? Is that like who lets go? What in that position?
It creates adversaries in this lifetime.
Okay.
Because you multiply that many times going down scale, and the pathway that one person takes will be diametrically opposed to another person's pathway, and they become enemies, right, not being able to see eye to eye on anything.
Okay. So then you say to love your enemies and to be... The conclusion of that is it dissolves it, does it? Or what are we... Where are we going then when you have two diametrically opposed opinions or points, and then you love them unconditionally? If one doesn't love unconditionally, it becomes superior and it controls.
That's right.
Okay, so we're back to that again.
Yep. Oh. And that is where the prime emphasis comes from. Control in communication, control in love, control in things. Okay? You got it? Continue on, sir.
So
Matthew, come up here, please.
Matthew always stands up with such strong intent when he wants to ask a question.
And then he turns and sits down again.
So my question involves coming upscale with an individual or personality that is, say, down at level 7, who is the highly resistant type that doesn't give up. Is he going to have then show a different kind of fever as he goes through the healing crisis moving up scale?
Everything will be different. And here's where two people start out together in life's patterns, or even a group of people start out, they're all equal. They're what you call equally yoked. Okay? And then what takes place at a later time, if one person is continually working to discipline himself or herself to move forward in life, and really move forward in life from a position of integrity and intent, then those two people become unequally yoked, and oftentimes in that relationship they will split because there's nothing holding them together except a rubber band that just broke, because one has moved very rapidly upscale, and the other has refused to move because they have continued to be in a position of being reactive in their behavior mechanisms. And this takes a great deal of discipline and a deep control so that we eliminate. Give those to Anita, if you would, please. Thank you very much, Christabel. Those are very much needed. Anita will be busy the next 2 days. Now, I hope you're with me on this. The thing is the concepts of one person changing in consciousness, they're not going to be leaving other people. They're going to be incorporating other people. But if you're in a church, what happens? The church kicks you out and you get your graduation papers. If you're in a group of people that no longer accept you because of your weird ideas, they boot you out. And it gives you a chance to find new friends because the changes that you have made in your mentality. The same thing will happen in a family. The same thing will happen in a marriage. Okay? People can't stand you anymore and they have to leave. Now, a person who is capable of incorporating and encompassing, they encompass, they don't leave. But they're usually kicked out, rejected, left by the group of people, excommunicated from your churches, and so that you have then the chance to grow. Because you don't think the way they think anymore. Now you remember this. A person who's godly incorporates. He doesn't leave. But a person who is ungodly will boot out anybody that differs from them in their opinion. You can take a look at the acts of people, and by their actions ye shall know them. Okay, any questions here? Lewis, come up here, sir. Please obey speed limits.
Okay, resistances are based in judgment. Are judgments then based in the truth resisted truth?
No. Judgments will be based upon a prior duality. And there may be 50 dualities in linear lines, so to speak, or holographic concepts if you want to look at it from that position. But from a logical point of view, there may be one duality that we encompass, which then opens up to our awareness, another duality that we encompass, which opens up to another duality which we encompass, and there may be 50 of them before we get to the time-space continuum warp.
But are they ultimately rooted in the truth resisted truth, even if there's 50 or 100 or however many?
Yes. At that time, then you're free of judgment patterns which govern and direct our lives, because we think we make our own choices. But our own choices are oftentimes determined by choices that we've already made, that we have forgotten about.
Okay.
So we're programmed to make the choices we make, thinking we have free agency.
As you were talking earlier, when someone goes down the involutionary spiral to a certain point where they have to be recycled and they come back in another reality.
Yes, sir?
As you're going up the evolutionary spiral, it's kind of a two-pointed question at least here. Okay, as at the level of the monopoles, as someone goes through the time-space continuum warp, you reach a point of infinite resistance and then zero resistance. Is that correct? Okay, but on the going through the time-space continuum warp,
you go to zero resistance and then you reappear at infinite.
Okay, right. But I understood that the resistance is increased as you're going upscale until you hit that point. And
that is on the one-pointed resistance.
Okay. So then as you go through the time-space continuum warp at zero resistance, you return at an infinite resistance?
Yes, sir.
At a different reality?
No, in this reality. Same body, same space.
That doesn't...
On the way back up, because again it is a healing crisis, you're going to go back through the zero resistance first, which is where you'll be a superconductor. Then you're going to reappear at infinite resistance. You're still in the same body, you're still in the same life, but what happens is you've basically totally shifted the parameters of your universe because you've removed that entire that truth-resisted truth no longer has a hold upon you.
You have let go of that resistance that has held you in bondage.
And thousands upon thousands of dualities that were all based upon it have all disappeared as well. So you're
and
still
you might spend 2 years going through those, one right after the other, as you reorient yourself to your new environment.
I'm still a bit unsure about when you come back at infinite resistance. Is that just the infinite resistance left over from everything that wasn't transmuted as a result of the truth-resisted truth?
In that area, yes. In that one segment of the pie.
You don't stay at infinite resistance very long, but it's a healing crisis, so you go through reverse order. So you go through zero on the way back up, then you reappear. See, you have a normal resistance in the human body that we've talked about, where it would be roughly 5,000 in a woman or 12,500 in a man. And what's going to happen is your resistance is your measurable resistance with a good meter is going to drop down to zero, totally disappear to where you're a superconductor, but it's not going to go down to zero and then sort of move back up to sort of a normal level of resistance. What's going to happen instead is it's going to go down to zero and then all of a sudden instantaneously reappear over at infinity and come back down to where it's supposed to go. So as John says, you basically go through zero and come out the other side. Or another way of saying it is you basically pass through a moment where you're simultaneously at zero and infinite. But you don't stay at infinite very long. Then you renormalize within your new parameters, but it's still the same body in the same lifetime.
Let's look at it this way. You're dealing with a series of coils and Mobius strips. And when you can put those together, you'll understand that. I haven't been able to get a real good model of it yet, but I have it up here.
One thing on this too, Lewis, as far as looking at these different dualities, during the course when I went through this experience, one of the things that we were doing is we were keeping, like, whoever was facilitating us was writing down our word patterns for us and writing down the different resistances that we were hitting. So
Doug could hold his body still.
Right. So you have a note, so we would each have a notebook, and there would be hundreds and hundreds of different word patterns in those notebooks, and each one of which would be related to some duality or another where I would have had resistance. One of the things that I was very struck by was that after I went back through the time-space continuum warp, I looked through the notebook and just looked through page after page after page of word patterns. And one of the things that I was really struck by was well over half of those word patterns were they no longer applied. There wasn't anything left of them. So it made me realize what a process of excavation the whole thing had been, because you had, it wasn't just hitting one particular word pattern that was your time-space continuum warp. It was getting, and of course it's not just word patterns anyways, it's the emotions and the memories and everything that go with it, but you had to peel off a tremendous amount of other dualities. As John was saying here, you got to peel off one duality in reverse order to see the one that's based on, to see the one that's based on, and on and on and on, and it's an incredibly complex thing. But when you finally hit pay dirt, all of a sudden just many hundreds of dualities will just drop away just like that, and all the baggage that goes with them. All the memories, all the resistances that go with each one of those dualities just disappears all at once. And that's why, as John said, it might take a person quite a while to sort of get things back together in their world, because everything is shifted. Because if your thinking has changed that much, then it sometimes takes a while for the physical universe to catch up. Things need a while to sort out.
Let me unload. I don't talk about personal situations. Because if I talk about personal situations, I can very easily influence other people to feel, well, that's them. But there are certain areas where there's a certain commonality. And I want to bring one particular time-space continuum warp out that I went through, personally. I went through 4 different time-space continuum warps, and my whole life just transformed. The one word pattern which has started out, which was very real to me, which I'm hearing many of you on the table, where I can't do what I want to do, I can't be what I want to be, I can't have what I want to have. And this is getting into areas of having things of a physical nature around us where we're focused on having, which then controls our doing, where we have to have things a certain way before we can do what we want to do. And then this controls our doingness, so to speak. And then we have to do what we want to do before we can be, but yet we feel that we can't be what we want to be. And I've heard some of the people on the table, well, I can't be what I want to be. And this is the beginning. Now let's say this is one resistance. I can't be what I want to be because mother won't let me do this, or dad won't let me do that, or I can't do it in school, or I don't have the money, and we have all kinds of other interrelated thought patterns with that. I can't be what I want to be. And then gradually, when we start sorting through the word patterns, we get into something similar to this. I can't be myself. How many of you have felt that way? I just can't be myself. And that's a good number of you, because I've heard this on the table with a good number of you, and that's why I'm bringing this one out. Then we reach a point when we get through the emotions and we look at it very carefully, the word patterns, I can't be myself, I can't be what I want to be type of thing, I can't be myself. And we reach a point then when we go in further, and I don't want to guide you or to influence you in any way on this. I'm giving you an example because each of us will have a different entry phrase that will be meaningful to us, that we will have a memory of within a framework of reality and certainty. Okay, and we move into that word pattern, which is I can't be. I can't be. And the thought I can't be is a denial of our beingness. And this is where we will end up dealing with, I just can't be. And therefore, everything that we do is controlled by somebody else because we're in a victim role, because we're being controlled, so we're fighting for our own survival here. I can't be. I can't control myself. I can't be myself. I can't think. I can't. And we're tied up with this, which will be at the bottom level where we can't do things, and then we have to do things later on. We get into that, and then we can be what we want to be. And we desire this and desire that, and we get trapped in the world of desire. But remember, in reverse order, we originally, every eye right here, please, we originally got caught in the world of desire, and then we got into enforcing that feeling, and then we reached a point where we inhibited that feeling, where we can't. So what I'm trying to point out, without damaging any of your individual progress by your own self-discovery of your own word patterns, is we start out at the bottom somewhere where I can't be myself. Well, look at the doing, look at the having, look at the things you don't allow yourself to have, look at the things you don't allow yourself to do with word patterns of this kind. Watch it very carefully. And then gradually, as you unravel and go through the feelings of identifying with and releasing one duality, and then the next duality, and then the next duality, eventually something will appear which will be very, very meaningful, that you know has affected your entire life, and this is what you look for. Okay? And that will be, I can't be. I can't be myself. I can't be. And we realize that, we felt that way all of our lifetime. We can't be. We can't be who we want to be. And that word pattern can take a number of different ramifications or reflections. And then finally we get back to, after we get into our I can't be, and then we get into a real struggle, I have to be myself, and all the emotions connected with that. And then we get into I desire to be. But what does desire to be have within it? That we don't have it. We don't have it yet because we want to be. But yet we're denying our beingness by the very desire that we want to be. And so we have to look at that aspect, and it takes a tremendous amount of introspection and understanding of how the human mind works in this area to see how we've trapped ourselves. And then suddenly we just recognize, I am. And because the word I am turns so many people off, is because there is so much resistances to identifying with oneself. And this is where a lot of people get all upset when you start talking about I am. They can't handle it because there's so many resistances to their affirming, shall we say, their own godliness, because there's so much resistance that enters in there where they have denied their own I amness. And this, therefore, all the word I am, as soon as you mention that, a lot of people go, grunt! They get all this pain inside of them, or emotional pain, or denial, and because they cannot accept themselves as who they are, which is a immortal, intelligent being. Because they have denied that in themselves for so long with so much hatred and so much resistance that they can't handle it. Are you with me on this? Okay, now you keep that in mind. And so they're always trying to find some way around the fact that every single human being is a God in embryo and hasn't discovered it yet for themselves through self-discovery or what we'll call self-realization. Are you awake? Christopher, are you awake? Good. You've got it. He's processing. Okay, Doug, your comment, sir.
Well, I really actually started this whole thing off as a question, but I wanted to just relate. I wanted you to relate this whole thing of control. I must control. I desire control. I must control. I can't control, and desire to be controlled, must be controlled, can't be controlled. You originally were relating that the whole resistance around the issue of control to the second death pathway. And I was hoping you could relate it as well to the one-pointed resistance pathway.
You just did.
Well, I must have missed it. Well, I just mean, let me just ask you this. Are you still going to go, as you move from fear down to unconsciousness on the path of one-pointed resistance, are you still going to go through the state of inhibition, the I can't control or the I can't be controlled? Because that sounds an awful lot like the giving up portion of it.
You're not giving up. You're becoming compulsively more and more in control, where you reach a point where if I can't control, then I will destroy. I didn't want to get into that.
You'll destroy what you can't control.
You destroy what you can't control. And if do you know people? Anita here has the intention to speak to us. Stand up, dear.
Just one little line. Murder is the ultimate control. Murder, when you think about it, it's the ultimate control.
Just think about it. That's true. Yes, sir? Let me go at this another way. I hope your notebooks are going to be ready on this one. I've never talked about this to my knowledge openly. If I have, you remind me. Another time-space continuum warp is around the area of creation. Have you ever seen a little child out on the beach where they build this beautiful, beautiful sandcastle, and after they built the sandcastle, what do? They kick it down. You ever seen that? Have you ever seen people who build beautiful businesses and suddenly they go out and deliberately destroy their business? They wipe it completely out where it becomes a total shambles. Have you seen people in marriages where they've got a beautiful marriage and then they go out and totally destroy the marriage? And they don't know why. It's just beyond their total control. Present company accepted. We've all been there, one way or the other. In marriages, in economics, in politics, in any type of things that we have created. Okay. Let's talk about creation for a few moments. And let's start with, I desire to create. So we have a desire then to create. And that means if we want to create something, what does that mean? That we don't have it. And therefore, if we don't have it, we feel we want to create it. So we have something. And so what is the initial thought process that cultivates our entire thinking? Lack. So every time we are in a creative mode, one pathway is coming from a lack. There's also another pathway which will be for constructive purposes, where we're involved in creating for a good cause. But still, if we're coming from a position of lack, which most of us in our reactive modes are coming from, we go out here and create something because we want it. But underlying all that, what is there? That we don't have it. And so what's the universe going to respond to? Our underlying belief pattern that we don't have it. So we end up dealing with something that's out of our control, where we want something, and then the resistance of the universe starts giving us opposition, and we have to go out here and force the issue to create the issue of the thing that we want. It becomes very hard because we have all this opposition that we didn't really intend to have, because we want this so bad, and everything goes wrong, and we force the issue through until we have created what we want. But what's the underlying factor that we've never dealt with yet? That we didn't have in the first place? What's the universe going to provide? A means of destruction. And it's going to be just like absolutely computer clockwork, and it's going to be taken away from you because you don't have what you thought you had, whether it be a marriage, whether it be a business, whether it be a position, whether it be an acceptance of responsibility somewhere. If you desire it, under that desire is the seeds of its own destruction. So you get into a word pattern like this. Every time I do something, it's wrong. And then we perpetuate that. Yeah, how many have ever felt that way? No matter what I do, it ends up in a disaster. Raise your hand. And we do it. And we do it perfectly. And so how can we judge people when they're absolutely manifesting their godlike thought patterns perfectly and creating chaos for themselves? How can you judge them and get upset with them? They're doing it perfectly, whatever they're doing. And this is why we don't judge. We just say, that's the way it is, let's take it from here. Look at it. Because we are the victims of our own thought patterns that we don't understand. We're the victims of our own desires, where we don't understand that the very thing we desire the most is the thing that we're going to destroy the fastest. If we're on that pathway, there's two pathways now. There's one where you're dealing from a non-reactive point of view. You're not coming from lack. You're coming from the ability to manifest, and that is where you're letting go of your creations, where you can have it or not have it, but you're still holding that ever-present in your mind without resistance. That's another matter. But that's not going to bother us, because we can't do that yet, because we haven't got, for the most of us, we don't have the ability to visualize, because we're trapped in our own karma. That we lend so much attention to by our resistance that we're really not able to be creative at this point of time. And those of us who think we're creative, we're just playing out old tapes. We're programmed to create the way we're creating on old tapes, where we're not truly capable of creating because our ability to visualize is not there. Yes, sir?
It would seem then, from what you're saying, that the list should be an ideal tool in this area, because we're going to not create karma, and we're going to be not creating any more karma, cleaning up the karma that we've already created, building on success upon success, and then not getting ahead of ourselves and having something be destroyed because we already have it to begin with.
I've got goosebumps all over me. The guy understands it. The list is the most important thing that you can involve yourself in. Now, I say this very gently, I say it very quietly, I try to be persuasive about it, about how important the list is. This is the most important thing you can involve yourself with, because it frees us of our karmic considerations. Say it again, sir.
From what you just stated, then, so that we don't create something that we then destroy, if we use the list properly and resolve the karma we've already made for ourselves and not create any more karma, build success upon success, then when we do create something, it will be using desire and desirelessness and doing it so that it's for the highest and best good within a framework of reality and certainty, and therefore not destroy the things that we've created.
That's exactly correct. Spot on. Now let me say one more thing here. Every creation, by the very fact that we are in the material universe, does the material universe does it have built within it duality? There is nothing in the physical universe that is not subject to duality. And therefore, you have within your Hindu scriptures, you have your creation, you have your survival, and you have your destruction, and then an element of rest. And I think they call it, what's the creation called? Brahma. What's the one called for survival? Shiva. And what's the destruction called? Vishnu. Is Shiva destruction? Okay, then it's Brahma, Shiva, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. There you have it. Okay? Now, when you understand this, the concepts that are taught in other philosophies or other religions, we understand that you have your creation aspect in every aspect of life. And with that, you have your duality. Because if desire enters into creation, we're in trouble. And so we have to have that desirelessness to control our desire. That goes back to the list again. Now, the same thing is true with the survival aspect of it. A lot of people are hung up where they can't create, or they can't continue on with something after they have created it, or they can't destroy it. And so you have many people that have the townhouse in the middle of the city that's been there for 300 years, that the rodents have got to very well, and the termites have destroyed, and yet don't tear down our heritage. And the people are out here wanting to pour millions of dollars into a restoration project rather than just tearing down that old building and get to it. And the moment that I say, oh, tearing down that old building, oh, that's history and that's part of the past. You can't do that. And so they spend their entire life preserving that which has been created, because they can't see anything destroyed. You got to hang on to it. You ever seen people who can't get rid of things, and everything that comes, they collect string, and they collect rubber bands, and they collect toothpicks, and one thing or another, and they have tons and tons stuffed away in boxes here and there because someday they might use it, and they never do. And they certainly can't give it away and get rid of it because, oh, this stuff is valuable. You ever see a junk man? His prize collections are those things from the 1920 vintage Ford, that have rusted away nearly entirely because somebody might need this sometime. And there's piles and piles of junk that are his prized possessions. But he doesn't see them corroding away, having lost their usefulness. But he hangs on to it desperately because he can't destroy something. He has to hang on to it. Okay, how many of us are in this, I can't destroy. I can't get rid of things. I can't change things. Then we get into the other aspect of it. Once you get something going, it has to go that way forever, and you can't change it. Okay? And so you have to keep everything running perfectly, and if somebody does something a little different than that which has been done over the last several years, or what Grandpa has established in his day, if anything changes, oh, you can't change that. And oftentimes we're stuck in a situation where we can't change tradition, we can't change culture, we can't change belief systems, we can't change thought patterns, we can't change the food that we eat, we're stuck to a regimen, we have to do our exercise at 6 o'clock every morning, and it has to be for an hour and a half, and we have to do our spins 21 times to the right every single time, and we have to do it right, and we go on and on where we can't change. Now, I want you to look at the word patterns on how this fits our personalities, because all of us are into that. And then we get into creation, where we think, and this was my thought pattern, that every creation must have a destruction. Oh, every creation must have a destruction. And so how did I get around that? Because I didn't want anything to be destroyed. I had such a resistance to any form of destruction. I had resistance toward warfare. I had resistance to hurting anything living. I didn't want anything hurt or destroyed. I just didn't. So what did I do on every single creation which I did? I botched it up to start with, so there's always something wrong, like down in the corner of a little page I'd leave something unfinished. So I would never feel like I created something, because it was always left unfinished. And therefore I felt good about that. I would get it just about done, but I'd always find a reason not to finish it. And so for the first number of years of my life, I never finished anything. What do you think came caving in on me when I went through the time-space continuum warp on every creation must have a destruction, and I recognized my whole life flitting before me? Every single thing that I had never finished, 200 items to be exact, it might be 202, phone calls, letters on things that I had never completed, came converging on me every direction, where I was forced, out beyond my choice, to complete. Took me 2 years on one thought pattern, one duality, one time-space continuum warp. And my whole lifetime just went through total transformation, because from that time on, I found I had to complete everything. Now, after I had taken responsibility for completing everything, then what happened? I had an experience where I was taught the list and the importance of the list, and how we can go through that list very assiduously, one thing at a time. It'll force us into our dualities as we look at the thought patterns and the emotions which are holding back our progress. And we move right into and up to the time-space continuum warp, where with a little bit of added effort we break right on through that. Now, Doug did the list very assiduously. I didn't. I didn't understand that. I was forced into doing my list. But it took me many, many months of concentration before I was able to go through and understand the anatomy of the time-space continuum warp. It took me agony of months and months to understand how this worked, because I had to come from no understanding at all of it. And this is...
it's like a...
I want to talk about one gentleman here, if I may. Hang on, Doug, please. This one gentleman that worked with me, he is another Bob, okay? Bob had little beady eyes, big thick glasses, pock marks all over his face, a good case of zits. He was skinny in his chest. He was all bent over, you know, somewhat. Not terribly, but bent over, and he was a little skinny guy. And he had a few problems here and there. And, you know, I just wondered, how did I ever get hooked into doing research with this gentleman? This went on for quite a little while. And finally, after the time-space continuum warp, he's just like an angel from heaven. He helped me through it. And he understood it, and he didn't understand it, but he understood what to do to help me through it. After that, he said, John, I'm going to be gone for about a month. When he came back, all of the cavities in his teeth, which were multitudinous, had all filled in. His zits were gone. He no longer wore his glasses, and his eyes were perfect. He had the status of a Greek god. His little skinny chest was out like this. His whole body had gone through a transformation. He had gained weight, 50 pounds to be exact. He had gained inches in his height. And I said, Bob, what in the world have you been doing? He says, and he told me a few things that he had been doing. He said he went on a 30-day fast. I said, did you drink any water? Yes, I breathed clean air and I drank pure water. Did you eat anything? He said, absolutely nothing, and he gained 50 pounds. He had learned the art from somebody that he would not reveal to me who it was or who worked with him, but he learned the art of breathing and taking in water and going through what both of us understood to be the various endothermic and exothermic reactions. And he rebuilt his entire body by visualization and by moving energies around which he created, which he had moved into his body at different times and different places to restructure and reorganize his body. He gained 50 pounds. I saw him at that time, and after that he disappeared, and nobody knows where he went, and nobody knows, you know, what happened. His eyes changed. His eyes were perfect. They were perfectly blue and clear. Not a blotch on them. Pardon me? Tape change coming up, okay. But all of this took place, and I'll tell you something. There's a lot of things we don't know about the area of transformation. But when he went through his transformation, I'll tell you this much. He earned it. And he was a contributing factor to the time-space continuum warp. His name is Bob Harvey. And I hope you run across him sometime, because he's just a gentleman and a scholar and one of the most beautiful men I have ever met in my life. Tape.